Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and it's been quite some time since we finished up looking at the original Savage Dragon miniseries, so I figured at this point it's the best time to get started at looking at the ongoing series with the Savage Dragon #1. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in June of 1993, I really like this cover a lot. This is nothing fancy, but it does a very good job of conveying the overall tone of what this issue is. And, obviously it's just featuring the main protagonist, but sometimes that's all you really need. Now, as I stated before, this is #1 of the ongoing series, and this is actually a direct continuation of the events that happened in the miniseries. So if you have not watched my videos on the first 3 issues that all took place in that miniseries, I suggest you do so before watching this. Otherwise, there's a lot of plot points that aren't really going to make a ton of sense. And also, you should probably watch my video on image number 0, as there is a very important plot point that takes place in that book specifically that will relate to a very specific event that is spoken of in this issue. I don't want to tell too much and get into some spoilers, but if you keep watching this video from this point forward, you're going to see a bunch of spoilers for some stuff that happened in those issues. So go back and watch the videos on those issues if you don't want the spoilers. Creator, writer, penciler, inker, Eric Larson. Letterer, Chris Eliopoulos. Colorist, Steve Oliff, Ruben Rude, and Zan Mika. I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong. Editor, Janie Wong. Color separators, Abel Mouton, Kiko Taganashi, Tracy Anderson, Squeaky Zindel, okay, Squeaky, Quinn Supley, Patty Stratton Jordan, Emily Jordan, Dennis Bine, Kathy Ennis, Mary, and Ollie Optics. Film output, Tony Kelly and Kello Graphics. Why on earth did they need this many color separators? That doesn't make sense, but whatever. I'm not the one who was making this book. We see here on the first page, Dragon is on his way towards confronting a villain that we're meeting for the first time named the Shrew. He's been on a killing spree for the past few weeks, just for no reason, picking people out and murdering them just for the fun of it. This is the point where Dragon tells him to give up, knowing that he probably won't. But in his inner monologue also states that, sometimes this job really sucks. And this is a point where we're starting to see the Dragon perhaps lose a little bit of the rose-colored glasses that he originally had for being on the police force when he got started with them. The Shrew, of course, does not surrender. He instead lunges forward at Dragon, who opens fire. The Shrew dodges the bullets and slices Dragon across the chest, knocking one of the guns out of his hand. Dragon still has the other gun and holds his chest, bleeding now. Apparently the Shrew's claws are sharp enough to slice Dragon's skin. Dragon takes a swing, however the Shrew manages to dodge the attack, comes back with one of his own, catching Dragon across the face. But this time, Dragon hits him with an uppercut, connecting. That hurts him, and Dragon feels like he's maybe got the ball in his court at this point, saying, "I'm glad you felt that one." However, the Shrew lunges forward again, this time slicing Dragon across the eyes, which knocks him down. He's blinded by his own blood. And at this point, the Shrew decides to make a swift retreat into the darkness of the Chicago alleyways instead of continuing this fight. And Dragon realizes that he blew his chance to bust this creep, which means that most likely more people are going to die as a result. And he's pretty angry with himself, as he even calls himself stupid in this instance. Later, back at the police precinct, we see that Dragon is all bandaged up when Frank Darling walks by and tells him that he looks awful and that he needs to stop pushing himself so hard. However, this makes Dragon upset. He jumps up to his feet and says, tell that to all those victims' widows, and that he's the only one who can stand up to these super creeps right now. And in case Frank's forgotten, he's kind of running himself thin, burning the candle at both ends to try and keep up with fighting off all of these new supervillains that are terrorizing Chicago. Frank states that he's trying to put together a unit of other superpowered beings to help Dragon out, and that, he's doing everything in his power to make that happen. But Dragon tells him to save it as he walks off, headed back out into the streets. Frank states, hey, I'm doing my best here. You got to give me a chance. And as Dragon walks away, he thinks to himself that he's gotten to the point where he doesn't necessarily trust Frank anymore. He realized that, something's off about the way that Frank's been acting over the last, several months. Keep in mind, it's been 2 years in the story since Frank first found Dragon and started this entire journey between the two of them. And they were once really close friends. And, Dragon just seems like he knows something's up. Like, he can't trust Frank, for all of the things he tells him or take him at his word anymore, because it just seems like he's kind of doing his best to impede Dragon's ability to, go after the heart of the matter and take on the vicious circle. But after he leaves, we get an inner monologue from Frank where he starts to remember everything that's happened and states that, the reason he can't go after any of the vicious circle is because they found out about Frank's plan to get Dragon to join the Force, and that it's because of the tips that he gave to the vicious circle that they were, able to find Dragon and ultimately kill Frank's cousin, which is what led to Dragon joining the Force in the first place. This, of course, is stuff that's got Frank on edge, as he believes if Dragon ever finds this out, that he may leave the Force, and also it'll completely derail all of Frank's entire career. He'll be fired for certain, possibly even prosecuted. And he's just kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, because he can only send Dragon after rival gangs or, lone wolf type of killers like the Shrew. And they're not really the ones who are causing the bulk of the crime in Chicago right now. It is indeed the vicious circle, who are currently kind of immune from having to deal with the Dragon at this point. As Dragon exits the police precinct, he passes by Officer Alex Wilde, who we met in the miniseries. She says hello, but he just walks by silently and keeps on about his way. The officer with Wilde states, is that a friend of yours? And she says, I thought so, but then also explains to him that Dragon's been under a lot of stress and a lot of emotional pain ever since Debbie was murdered in his apartment. We, of course, saw this happen in image number 0. Dragon is at a point now where he's kind of blaming himself, understandably so, as he's the one who asked Debbie to answer the door when the gunman opened fire the moment she did. And had Dragon been the one to answer the door instead, he would have been fine, because keep in mind, his skin is bulletproof. The round would have hit him and bounced off, causing no damage whatsoever. And instead, Debbie was shot in the head and killed instantly. We see that Dragon goes to a local watering hole to sit and kind of drown his sorrows in a beer, with another man sitting next to him that's pouring alcohol out of a flask into a shot glass, which is kind of hilarious. Like, there's no bar on earth that would let you bring your own flask in and start pouring yourself drinks with. And then Dragon is approached from behind by a very large man who calls him a pipsqueak, as the man with the flask turns and is pretty shocked to see this big hulking brute who wants to fight with Dragon. Dragon recognizes him immediately as a man called Johnny Nitro. He states that, hey, I'll buy you a beer before I, haul you into jail. Nitro continues to mock him, stating that's not going to happen. He's like, why don't you breathe some fire at me, Dragon? Can you do that? Oh, that's right, you can't. And then Dragon decides to show him that, while he maybe doesn't have the power to breathe fire, that doesn't mean that he can't pull it off, as he takes a swig of the flask that the man sitting next to him had, grabs Johnny Nitro's hand with the lighter that he was taunting him with, and then spits all of the alcohol through the flames, spraying a breath of fire directly into Nitro's face, which he doesn't take kindly to, as he finds it quite shocking and disturbing. After that, we see Dragon throw Nitro across the bar, taking him out of the fight. This, of course, starts a melee, which seems odd that everyone in the bar would suddenly want to attack Dragon. I mean, he was clearly the one that was being, semi-attacked in this instance. And also, if everybody else in the bar was a criminal, why wouldn't they have just jumped him when he walked in? But, this is the way the story's going. We see one guy just fly through the air at him, which I don't know exactly what kind of attack he was planning on executing. Dragon wastes no time in catching him with a punch, knocking him backwards through the air. A second man grabs him from behind, putting him in a chokehold, but Dragon just reaches over the back of his head, punching that man square in the face, which knocks him out through the plate glass window at the front of the bar. He then grabs another man, slamming his face into the wall, also then punching another dude, which sends him across the bar through some tables and chairs. And then when it's all over, the owner of the bar walks out and says, "No, my beautiful bar is ruined. What am I going to do now? This is the worst day of my life." And Dragon just kind of insults her by saying, "Hey, do I tell you my problems?" We then see a news report stating that another Mighty Man sighting has happened, which, if you'll remember in the miniseries, the alter ego of Mighty Man, who was Robert Berman, died after being stabbed in his apartment. So nobody's really certain what's going on here. If this is in fact Mighty Man, or if this is just some sort of imposter, or, people are just, making stuff up, saying, "Oh, we saw this guy, he was out there," kind of like Elvis sightings. It's somewhat of a mystery at this point. No one really knows what to make of it. We're then suddenly teleported to a home outside of Declub, Illinois, where we see inside there's a man lying dead on the floor in a pool of blood with a gun in his hand, and a woman also dead in the chair at the kitchen table. And we see in the background the door to the basement is cracked open, where we hear someone yell out, "Mom, Dad, Mom, what's going on?" And then screaming "Mom" loudly and questioning what's happening. And it's very mysterious, and it's going to remain a mystery because this is the only page that addresses this part of the story in this issue. Meanwhile, back in the city, we see Alex show up to the bar and state, "Wow, this place looks like a hurricane went through it." And Dragon says, the cleaning lady had the day off. It's at this point that Alex is basically had enough and tells Dragon how worried she is about him, and how she believes that, he's not really dealing with Debbie's death very well, and she knows how hard that is for him. But, she does believe that he needs to try and move on with his life at this point, and even offers to help in any way she can. Dragon, of course, takes this opportunity to kind of scoff at her and actually become very, inappropriate, I guess is the best word, as he states, "Oh, are you offering to sleep with me? Hop in the sack?" She, of course, scoffs at the idea and says, "In your dreams, how dare you even bring something like that up?" And then states what she was really talking about was that she believes Dragon should go to Debbie's grave and lay some flowers by her headstone, and even tells Dragon that this was something that really helped Alex when her father died in, achieving some closure and finding a way to move on with her own life despite losing someone that she truly loved and cared about. And Dragon seems to, think that maybe this is an idea that he can get behind, and decides to go with her. We then see Dragon approaching Debbie's grave, where he sees an elderly woman hunched on the ground, leaning over it. And he states, "Mrs. Harris," and we find out that this is actually Debbie's mom. She turns around, sees him, and begins to start shouting at him, yelling at him, and blaming him for Debbie's death, even though, it obviously wasn't Dragon's fault, really. He wasn't the guy who killed her. There was a man who shot her in the head when she opened the door, and he then turned the gun on himself afterwards. And this is most likely the reason that Debbie's mom is so furious with Dragon, because she can't actually be furious with the guy who killed her daughter, so she has to direct her anger at someone, and Dragon's the easy target. She then states that, he'll burn in hell for what he did, and that, she'll never forgive him, and just screams at him to go away and never come back to this place, as we see him hanging his head, dragging the flowers along the ground behind him. When he gets back to the car, Alex says, "There, you feel better now, right?" And he closes the door to the car and states to her, "Next time, how about, you just stab a nail into my forehead and make this a lot less painful for both of us, and keep me from driving all the way out here and wasting gas." We also see that Dragon at this point is sporting a mustache, and no doubt this is probably because Debbie, right before she died, stated that she thought Dragon would look super handsome with a mustache, and it's kind of his way of honoring her memory. Later on in the evening, we see Dragon walking down an alleyway as he states, this day has just been terrible from start to end, or from beginning to end. And, he's tired of dealing with all of these headaches. He even mentions that there's some crazy old lady who keeps calling the station, stating that Dragon is her son, Rodney Schwarzenblatt, which he doesn't know anything about and doesn't really care to. He also then states that the shrew has been located again because, of course, he wouldn't be able to keep a low profile with the trail of bodies he's leaving. And that this time he's tracked him down, but he came prepared. And this preparation is not at all what you'd expect, as we're about to see. We then see the shrew is standing over his most recent victim, covered in blood, when he hears from behind him someone say, "Hey, beautiful," and turns around to see that the dragon is standing behind him, ready to fight, and his idea of coming prepared was to bring dual chainsaws to fight this supervillain with. None of this makes sense at all. The fact that he decided to come with a chainsaw in each hand to this fight instead of literally any firearm is absurd. And the fact that we're supposed to believe Dragon walked out of the precinct saying, "Hey, I'm going after the shrew." And they're like, "Hey, do you need anything out of the armory?" And he told them, "No, I already stopped by Home Depot earlier today and took care of everything I was going to need." We just see him cross the chainsaws, revving both of them up. As the shrew jumps forward, going after him, we then see that Dragon catches the shrew across the face with one of the chainsaws, almost like a boxing glove of sorts. He then swings with the second one. We see a huge blast of blood come off of the shrew, who gets knocked back, yelling as he does so. This is so hilarious in so many ways, but I absolutely love it. It doesn't make sense, but I'm down for it. This is the type of absurdity I love seeing in my superhero comics. The shrew, however, continues to fight on, actually landing a few blows of his own, catching Dragon with a backhand that slices him across the chest. Also then taking one of the chainsaws and ripping it to shreds. Apparently his claws can cut through metal, which explains how they're able to pierce Dragon's skin. He then continues to attack Dragon, disarming him of the other chainsaw, and then lunges forward to go in for the kill. However, Dragon was ready as he catches him with a huge left hook and then continues to punch him over and over again until he knocks him onto the ground, and then really starts to lay into him as we see him continuing to just pummel the shrew as he's on the ground incapacitated. As Dragon continues his assault, just punching the shrew in the face over and over again, letting pools of blood explode off of him as he does so, he suddenly stops, staring at his hands, which are now covered in the shrew's blood, as the shrew's body lays on the ground, just blood pouring out of him. We don't know if the shrew is alive at this point, but we do see that Dragon looks down at his body, blood dripping off of his hands, and we then see his face as he realizes that, he's out of control at this point, and that he can't allow himself to become the same kind of monster that he's fighting against, and is worried now that, he won't be able to maintain control in his fight against the criminal element of Chicago. And that's really not an option for him if he wants to continue to be an upstanding police officer and fight on the right side of the law. Back at the police station, he was, looking into the mirror, removing all of his bandages. Frank is surprised, stating, "Man, are you sure that's a good idea?" But Dragon reminds him that he heals very quickly. It's at this point that Frank tells him of some super beings that were noticed in Chicago's underground and wants Dragon to go take a look to make sure they're not up to no good. However, Dragon looks at him and plainly states, "Hey man, I hope this isn't just some, red herring that you're sending me after again. Lately your info has been a little bit spotty at best, and I'm wondering if you're sending me on these wild goose chases for a reason that I don't know." Kind of implying that, he wants Frank to know that, he's really questioning a lot of the information that Frank is giving him, and he doesn't fully trust that Frank has his or, the PD's best interest at heart. Later on that evening, we see Dragon slowly stalking through the Chicago underground, which he states are basically the old buildings of Chicago that were just built on top of instead of torn down. And now it's just a haven for tourists and drug dealers and the homeless. And a lot of criminal element hides out down here too, as we see him slowly work his way into a building, trying to make sure that nobody gets the jump on him. However, he's unsuccessful when we see a hand swipe the gun straight out of his hand, and a silhouette of a large figure and a smaller figure on its shoulder, as Dragon is surprised and states, "Hey, you just made a real big mistake, pal." We then get treated to this really awesome 2-page splash image where we see that the man who knocked the gun out of Dragon's hand is in fact very large, as he then backhands Dragon, knocking him flat off of his feet, as the woman who's with him calls him by his name, Barbaric, and says, "Don't, he's a cop." And things are going to get a little bit out of hand here for the two that Dragon has happened upon, as this fight looks like it's about to heat up. Dragon goes flying, crashing through a bunch of old boards. As he gets back to his feet, he says, "You're in big trouble." And the woman then states, "Hey, maybe we should cool it for a second." But Barbaric says, "Forget it, Ricochet," who the woman in question. He's on our turf. We have to defend it, as we see Barbaric jump through the air. Once again, the leaping air attack that I don't understand how that's supposed to work. Ricochet says, "Okay, I guess we're in this now," as suddenly Dragon does the exact same move he did to the punk in the bar, catching Barbaric with a huge punch, knocking him backwards through the air. This, of course, makes Ricochet very upset as she screams no, using her own ability to fly through the air, smack Dragon in the side of the head, and bounce straight up off of him, very quick and much faster than he can react to. However, Dragon completely ignores Ricochet's attack as he then leaps forward and continues his assault on Barbaric, punching him again, sending him backwards into a brick wall, which then collapses down upon him. This, of course, upsets Ricochet a lot as she screams his name out in terror. She then pleads with Dragon to stop and states that he's had enough, please don't kill him. However, we see that Barbaric is actually fine as he pulls himself up out of the rubble, ready to continue the battle. Dragon seems like he's ready to keep going as we see Ricochet running in from the side, pleading with the two of them to stop their fight and to just hold on for a second so that cooler heads can prevail. As the two men prepare to continue their battle, Ricochet once again tries to get them to stop, even throwing herself in between the two of them, shouting, "Knock it off," and then pleads with Dragon, stating, "Hey, we're just crashing in an abandoned building. Are you really going to kick the crap out of us for that?" It's at this point that Dragon realizes that he is definitely going over the line again, and backs down, stating that he's sorry, he wasn't trying to hurt them. Ricochet believes that things are starting to calm down now as she and Barbaric stop fighting against him. And he even states, that everything's been going crazy lately in the city and that, days are just bleeding into one another. And, he's just kind of at his wit's end now when it comes to dealing with superpowered villains and the terror that they're wreaking across the city. And Barbaric even offers an apology then, stating, "Hey, I kind of started it. I did knock the gun out of your hand. I'm sorry for that." And Ricochet then says to him, "It's understandable, that you would be under this kind of stress, but, you don't have to go it alone. There are other people out here who have abilities like us that might be, able to help you. We could actually use a job if, you're hiring. It's hard for them to make ends meet." And it's at this point that Dragon realizes, they are just a couple of homeless kids who are trying to make their way in the world. And he looks back as he's walking away and says, "You know what? I might just take you up on that offer." And then states, "I'll be seeing you," as we see the two in the background just stating bye, as the book ends at this point. But there is a little bit of possible foreshadowing going on here as to what the future may hold for Barbaric and Ricochet in terms of their relationship with the dragon. We then reach the letter section, which is now called Fin Addicts, like Fanatics. Pretty clever. That name was submitted by one Freddie Bivetto from Dayton, Ohio. Congratulations, Freddie. Fin Addicts was your idea, and now you're getting a shout out not only in the Savage Dragon comic, but on my YouTube channel for what that's worth. Most of this is just standard fare, people asking some questions, complimenting Erik Larsen on his work. But the important part is what we see right here, where Erik outlines the final entry date for a contest to submit a character that will be featured in Savage Dragon as either a hero or a villain. It states the rules, how you have to go about submitting it, you know, how you have to give artwork, give a rundown of what the character's powers are and what their motivations are, that whole thing. And that once a winner is selected, that character will appear in Savage Dragon issue number 10. And I can't tell you how cool I think this contest actually was. The idea that you could submit your own character to appear in a nationally syndicated comic book is pretty awesome. And the best part about it is that you continue to retain the ownership rights for that character. All of that was explicitly stated in the contest rules by Larsen, where he states like, hey, you know, I'm going to use this character this one time in an issue, but the character is going to remain yours in perpetuity, which again, super cool of him. And we'll be seeing how that works out in the future. We then get an advertisement for Vanguard, who is coming, and he will be coming, and we're going to see him when this series continues. We then get an advertisement for Project Metaforce, and I'll be quite frank with all of you, I don't know what the hell Project Metaforce actually is. I've never seen an issue of this book ever in my life. I don't recall ever reading the logo for Imagine This Productions. If you know anything about this at all, either Imagine This Productions or more specifically Project Metaforce, feel free to leave any comments about it in the comments section below, because I'd like to know more about it, and I really know nothing about it as of recording this video. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for Brigade number 0. I'm at kind of a standstill with my Brigade series. I started making videos on the Brigade mini-series, which happens before the ongoing series, much like Savage Dragon did. And I did not realize when I started making those videos that I did not have the entirety of the miniseries. So until I can track down issue number 3, we're kind of stuck. And I am working on it. I look for it anytime I go to a store with a lot of back issues, but I've got to find that issue before I can continue on with my Brigade series. But if you'd like to know more about Brigade being, you know, issues number 1 and 2 of the miniseries, you can check out my Brigade playlist. And that was Savage Dragon number 1 of the ongoing series. And I really like this issue a lot. I think Erik Larsen did a fantastic job of humanizing the dragon and showing the emotional pain and turmoil he's going through after losing Debbie in such a violent and traumatic fashion. And even though they didn't date for very long, I mean, it's still the fact that the woman that he was currently in a relationship was just murdered on the doorstep of his apartment. And, you know, him having to deal with the fallout of that, and also having to try and keep his head in the game when it comes to an incredibly high-stress work environment, being the only person on the force who's capable of dealing with these supervillains and having, like, basically the weight of the world on his shoulders. You know, it's a different take on a superhero that we don't really see in a lot of other books from this time. There's also the fact that, you know, Erik's also doing this, I think, pretty good balancing act of blending the old with the new in terms of creating this long format storytelling comic book while also utilizing elements from comic books of the past where he has Freak of the Week villains show up like the Shrew. And, you know, it's one of those things that you can tell where Erik was getting his influences from, in terms of, obviously, he's a huge fan of Jack Kirby's artwork. That's, you know, goes without saying. But also that type of storytelling where, you know, he understands the necessity of, you know, transitioning to a long format ongoing story and, you know, kind of changing what the industry needed to start doing to kind of bring them into the new millennium, but also not wanting to completely ignore their past and forget where they came from. It's one of the things I really admire a lot about Eric and his work. But then again, these are just my opinions. Your opinions may be completely different. You might have thought that this was a terrible comic and that Eric did a terrible job with it. And if so, it's okay because everybody's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.